You know that person everyone relies on when emotions get messy. The one who listens, the one who calms the room, the one who says quietly, "It's okay. I understand." For years, they are the emotional shock absorber of everyone around them. Arguments dissolve around them. Tension gets filtered through them. Other people explode, and they stay calm. Until one day, something shifts. They stop explaining themselves. They stop smoothing everything over. They stop absorbing what doesn't belong to them. And suddenly people say, "What happened to you? You've changed. You used to be so understanding." But here is the uncomfortable truth. They didn't change. They just stopped abandoning themselves. I notice something strange about people who feel deeply. Many of them learn a dangerous lesson very early in life, that love must be earned by being easy to deal with. So they become the peacemakers. They swallow irritation. They hide anger. They carry emotional weight that was never theirs. They read every tone of voice, every silence in the room, every shift in someone's mood. And slowly, without realizing it, they start disappearing from their own life. Carl Jung warned about this. He said the parts of us we refuse to face do not vanish. They accumulate in the shadow. Anger, frustration, the instinct to say no. If someone spends years trying to be endlessly patient, endlessly understanding, those buried emotions do not die. They wait. And eventually something cracks. Not loudly. At first it's just a quiet realization. I have been loyal to everyone except myself. And when that realization arrives, a line appears, a boundary that was never there before. And that is usually the moment people around them become uncomfortable, because the person who used to absorb everything is no longer available for that role. In Jung's view, this is not someone becoming cold. It is something far more unsettling. It is the beginning of wholeness, the beginning of someone meeting the parts of themselves they were taught to suppress, and from the outside, that can look like a personality change. But inside, it is the first honest step toward integrating the shadow. There is a mistake many sensitive people repeat for years, sometimes for decades. And the strange part is this. At first, it looks like kindness. They listen more than they speak. They forgive quickly. They tolerate behavior that most people would question. They tell themselves things like, "They didn't mean it. They're just going through a hard time. I should be more understanding." And for a while, that sounds noble. But something subtle begins to grow underneath all that patience. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter. Resentment. The kind that builds slowly, almost invisibly. Because every time someone ignores your limits and you stay silent, a small weight is added inside you. Every time you say yes while meaning no, another weight. Every time you absorb someone else's chaos to keep the peace, another one. At first you don't notice. You just feel tired, emotionally tired. Carl Jung understood something most people overlook. He believed the psyche seeks balance. If someone expresses only patience, only understanding, only softness, then the opposite qualities do not disappear. They sink underground. They wait inside the shadow. And resentment is often the first signal that something inside you has been buried for too long. Resentment is not the problem. In many cases, it is a message, a quiet signal from the deeper layers of the psyche saying, something important about you is being ignored. Something inside you has no voice. But many people who are used to being the emotional caretaker misinterpret this feeling. Instead of listening to it, they suppress it, they push it down, they tell themselves they are being dramatic, selfish, unreasonable. So the resentment keeps growing, silently. And this is where things become dangerous, because buried resentment does not stay polite forever. One day, it reaches the surface, not as a calm boundary, but as an emotional explosion that surprises everyone in the room, including the person who has been holding it in. People say, that came out of nowhere. But it didn't. It was forming quietly for years, in the parts of the psyche that were never allowed to speak. Jung once suggested that what we refuse to confront in ourselves eventually forces its way into consciousness. And when that happens suddenly, it feels like losing control. But psychologically speaking, it is often the shadow demanding to be seen. Carl Jung had a way of saying uncomfortable things very calmly. One of them was this: everyone carries a shadow, not a poetic shadow, a psychological one, a place where the parts of us go when they are judged unacceptable. Anger, self-assertion, the instinct to protect our own space. If someone grows up in an environment where harmony is rewarded and conflict is punished, they learn very quickly which emotions are allowed to exist and which ones must disappear. So the child becomes agreeable, understanding, emotionally intelligent. They read the room before speaking. They soften their tone. They adjust themselves to avoid friction, and everyone praises them for it. You're so mature. You're so easy to be around. You're different from other people. But something important is happening behind the scenes of the psyche, because every time a person suppresses anger, that anger does not vanish. It is simply relocated, moved into the shadow. Jung believed the shadow is not evil. That's the misunderstanding. The shadow contains everything the personality was forced to reject in order to be accepted. Sometimes it contains aggression, but sometimes it also contains strength, directness, the ability to say no without apologizing. And when those qualities are buried for too long, the personality becomes unbalanced, too accommodating, too forgiving, too available. From the outside, it looks like kindness. From the inside, it can feel like quiet self-erasure. Eventually, the psyche begins to push back, because the mind cannot stay divided forever. The buried parts begin to leak out, small flashes of irritation, unexpected waves of anger, moments where patience suddenly disappears, and the person thinks, "Why am I reacting like this?" But Jung would say something very simple. You are not becoming someone else. You are meeting the parts of yourself that were never allowed to exist. The real danger is not the shadow itself. The real danger is ignoring it for too long, because what is ignored in the psyche rarely stays quiet. It grows. It gathers emotional pressure until one day it no longer asks for attention. It demands it. And when that moment comes, the calm person everyone thought they understood suddenly becomes unpredictable, not because they changed, but because the shadow has finally entered the room. There is a feeling many empathetic people are almost ashamed to admit. Resentment, not loud resentment, not dramatic resentment. The quiet kind, the kind that sits in the chest like a weight you can't quite explain. It usually starts with small moments. Someone crosses a line, and you stay silent. Someone expects more from you, and you give it. Someone unloads their emotions on you, and you carry them. Again, and again, and again. On the surface, everything still looks peaceful. But inside, something begins to shift, because every unspoken no leaves a trace. Every swallowed frustration leaves a mark, and slowly the person who once gave freely begins to feel something unfamiliar, a kind of emotional fatigue. They still care about people, but now there is a quiet voice inside saying, "Why is it always me? Why am I the one holding everything together? Why does no one notice when I'm exhausted?" This is the moment many people become confused about themselves, because resentment does not fit the identity they built. They see themselves as patient, understanding, supportive. So when resentment appears, they judge it immediately. "I shouldn't feel this way. Something must be wrong with me." But Jung would look at this moment very differently. He believed resentment can appear when the persona becomes too strong. The persona is the mask we learn to wear to be accepted, the helpful one, the calm one, the reliable one. And if that mask becomes too rigid, the rest of the psyche starts pushing back. Resentment becomes a signal, a psychological alarm, not saying that you are a bad person, but saying something far more important, that the life you are living no longer reflects the truth of who you are. Most people ignore this signal. They double down on patience. They try harder to be understanding. They tell themselves that being good means enduring more. But the psyche does not work like that. Pressure does not disappear just because we refuse to acknowledge it. It accumulates quietly until the person who once avoided conflict reaches a moment they never expected, a moment where something inside them says, "Enough." And that is the moment everything begins to change. It rarely happens in a dramatic way. There is no speech, no emotional declaration, just a small moment that feels strangely heavy. Someone asks for something, time, energy, patience, and for years the answer would have been automatic. "Of course, no problem. I'll handle it." But this time something different happens. A pause, a longer silence than usual, and then a simple word appears: "No." For many people, this moment feels almost unsettling, not because the word is harsh, but because it is unfamiliar. The body reacts first, the heart beats faster, the chest tightens. A quiet thought appears: was that too much? Did I hurt them? Should I take it back? Because when someone spends years defining themselves through patience and understanding, setting a boundary can feel like betrayal. But psychologically speaking, something important has just happened. Jung believed the psyche moves toward integration, toward balance. When one side of the personality dominates for too long, the neglected side begins to emerge. For someone who has always been accommodating, the emerging quality is often assertion, the ability to protect one's own energy, the instinct to step back instead of absorbing everything. And at first, this new behavior can feel uncomfortable, even unnatural, because the identity built over years begins to shift. People around them notice immediately, not because the person has become aggressive, but because the dynamic has changed. The emotional caretaker of the group is no longer silently managing everyone else's needs. The quiet stabilizer is suddenly unavailable, and this creates tension, because many relationships quietly depend on unspoken roles. When one person changes their role, the entire structure shifts. And this is why the first boundary often creates confusion. Some people will respect it, others will react with irritation. A few may even accuse the person of becoming selfish. But what is really happening is far simpler. The balance of the relationship is being rewritten for the first time, and the psyche, after years of suppression, begins to reclaim something essential: a voice. The first boundary rarely creates silence. It creates reactions, sometimes subtle, sometimes sharp. A raised eyebrow, a disappointed tone, a comment that sounds almost casual. You've changed. At first it sounds like concern, but listen closely. Often what people really mean is something else. You're not behaving the way you used to. For years, the relationship had an invisible structure. One person absorbed tension, one person adapted, one person made sure things stayed smooth. And when someone holds that role long enough, everyone else begins to depend on it, not always consciously, but deeply. So when that person begins to set limits, something strange happens. The system destabilizes. People who benefited from that emotional availability suddenly feel resistance, and resistance creates discomfort. Some respond with confusion. Why are you being distant? Others respond with subtle guilt. I guess I just won't bother you anymore. And a few respond with irritation. You're overreacting. But psychologically speaking, these reactions are not really about the boundary itself. They are about the loss of the old dynamic. The unspoken arrangement has been broken. The person who used to absorb everything has stepped out of that position. Jung believed that when someone begins integrating their shadow, their relationships often shift. Because the shadow contains qualities that disturb familiar expectations: directness, firmness, the refusal to tolerate what once seemed normal. To people who were comfortable with the old version of you, this can feel threatening, not because you became hostile, but because you became unpredictable. You no longer respond in the same automatic ways, and that forces everyone around you to adjust or to resist. This is the difficult truth many people face in this stage. Some relationships grow stronger when honesty enters the room. Others quietly fall apart because they were built on imbalance, on one person giving more and the other becoming used to it. And when that imbalance disappears, the relationship reveals what it truly was. Many people misunderstand what happens after this stage. They assume the person becomes colder, more distant, more guarded. But that is not what Jung meant when he spoke about integrating the shadow. Integration does not mean becoming harsh. It means becoming complete. Before this shift, the personality was built around one side: patience, understanding, endless emotional availability. Those qualities are not wrong. In fact, they are deeply human. But when they exist alone, without boundaries, without self-protection, they slowly turn into self-abandonment. And the psyche resists that for a reason. When the shadow begins to integrate, something subtle changes. The person still cares. They still listen. They still understand the emotions of others. But now something else stands beside those qualities: strength, clarity, the ability to say no without drowning in guilt. For the first time, compassion is no longer directed only outward. It is also directed inward. And this creates a different kind of presence, calmer, more grounded, because the person is no longer suppressing half of their nature. They are not trying to appear endlessly agreeable. They are simply honest, honest about their limits, honest about their energy, honest about what they will and will not carry. And strangely, this honesty often creates deeper respect, even from people who initially resisted the change. Jung believed the real task of psychological growth was never perfection. It was wholeness, to recognize the parts of ourselves we were taught to hide, not to be controlled by them, but to know them, to bring them into awareness, because the parts of the psyche we understand stop controlling us from the shadows. So when someone who has always absorbed everyone else's emotions finally sets limits, finally speaks honestly, finally refuses to carry what does not belong to them, it may look like they became harder, but in many cases, the opposite is true. For the first time in their life, they are no longer divided. They are simply whole.